the divine empire. For thousands of years, across a dozen star systems, there was only one truth the people of the galaxy were told to believe. The Ascended were gods. They ruled from shining temples built in orbit above the worlds they conquered. Their fleets came like storms of fire, darkening skies and leaving only silence behind. Those who resisted were erased, and those who bowed were forced into worship. Every world had altars. Every city had shrines. In the great squares of conquered planets, statues of the Ascended stood higher than mountains. Their priests spoke of eternal power, eternal wisdom, and eternal punishment. To doubt was forbidden. To whisper against the gods was to vanish overnight. Fear was not just a shadow in the people's hearts. It was the only language they knew. The Ascended appeared perfect. They wore golden armor that shimmered like sunlight, and walked as if gravity itself obeyed them. They spoke in voices that echoed through the minds of mortals, making every listener tremble. They called themselves divine, and for ages no one dared question it. But behind their masks of holiness was empire. They wanted tribute, armies, slaves, and endless praise. The conquered species had no choice but to kneel. Whole generations grew up never knowing freedom, never dreaming that their rulers were anything less than gods. The Ascended themselves believed their own lie. They had not faced defeat in centuries. To them, their throne among the stars was unshakable. Until one night, on a quiet world in the outer sectors, their lie began to crack. It started as a faint signal, static, broken, strange. At first, the Ascended priests dismissed it as nothing, but their warlords looked closer. The signal was no natural wave, no random interference. It was structured, precise, carrying codes their libraries did not recognize. Someone was speaking in a language not written in their sacred archives. For the first time in centuries, the gods did not understand. In their grand palace, floating above the world of Alaris, the High Ascendant gathered his council. Armored figures with glowing eyes bent over star maps, their voices heavy with unease. The signal was growing stronger, moving closer, crossing into sectors forbidden to mortals. Their ships traced it to a single vessel, vast in size, unlike anything recorded in their histories. It was moving with purpose. It was heading straight toward their heartland. The High Ascendant declared it an act of blasphemy. He spoke before thousands, his voice amplified across every conquered world. An intruder comes into the realm of the divine. A shadow dares to enter the light. We will strike it down, and all will see once more that no power in the galaxy is greater than ours. His words were strong, but his generals did not share his certainty. They had ruled so long unchallenged that they had forgotten the meaning of fear. Now with every report, fear returned. The vessel was massive, its hull dark and cold. It carried no banners, no symbols of any known empire. Its weapons were hidden, its shields unreadable. It moved slowly, silently, as if nothing around it mattered. Fleets of the Ascended rushed to intercept, but the intruder did not change course. In the temples, priests told the people not to worry. They said this was only another mortal ship that would be burned like all the others. They said the gods could never fall. The people repeated the words, but inside something had begun to stir. For the first time in living memory, the gods looked uncertain. The lesser races whispered to one another in secret. If the intruder could reach so far into the sacred core, if it could ignore the threats of the divine, then perhaps the gods were not as eternal as they claimed. Perhaps the universe was larger than the Ascended. Perhaps there was something stronger. The High Ascendant ordered every fleet in range to converge. Thousands of ships lit up the skies, their engines glowing like suns. They formed a wall of fire and steel, blocking the intruder's path. They sent their messages in the holy tongue. Bow to the divine. Turn away or be destroyed. The reply was silence. The intruder slowed but did not stop. Its massive frame drifted closer, its dark hull covered with scars of battles no one in the Ascended's memory could recognize. Across its side was a single emblem, simple, strange, unholy to the eyes of the gods. A circle, a star, a blue world wrapped in black. No one knew its meaning. Not yet, the Ascended generals whispered among themselves. Never had a ship ignored their commands. Never had a vessel entered their sacred space without falling to its knees. But this one was different. This one moved with no fear, no hesitation. The High Ascendant shouted, his voice shaking the walls of the palace. They come to test the divine. Show them the fire of gods. And so across the stars, weapons powered up. Fleets prepared for battle. The air of the galaxy trembled as engines roared and cannons lit the void. Every conquered world turned its eyes upward. The gods had promised victory. They had promised eternal power. But in the hearts of many, a thought whispered for the first time in 1,000 years. What if the gods could fall? The first encounter. The fleets of the Ascended stretched across the stars like a wall of fire. Thousands of ships moved in perfect formation, their golden hulls gleaming under the light of nearby suns. To the conquered people watching from their planets below, the sight was terrifying and familiar. This was the image of divine judgment, the power that had crushed empires and silenced whole civilizations. Yet this time something felt different. The enemy was only one ship. It drifted at the edge of their territory, massive and silent, as if waiting. No signals came from it. No banners of surrender were shown. It simply moved forward, calm and deliberate, as if the fleets around it did not matter. The Ascended commanders spoke to one another through private channels. They had expected fear, confusion, or at least a desperate plea. Instead, the silence of the intruder pressed on their minds like a weight. One general, old enough to have fought rebellions long ago, muttered words that no one wanted to hear. "They are not afraid of us." The High Ascendant himself appeared in their council, his golden form towering over the projections of his warlords. His voice was thunder. "No mortal dares enter our realm without fear. This ship is nothing but arrogance. Destroy it, and let the galaxy remember what becomes of those who challenge gods." Orders spread like fire. Squadrons of attack ships launched from the fleets, their engines blazing blue trails across the void. They formed wings of death, racing toward the dark intruder. Weapons charged, plasma cannons hummed, missiles prepared for release. To the eyes of the galaxy, this was the moment where defiance would be punished, as always. The first barrage struck. Streams of burning plasma, enough to vaporize cities, slammed into the side of the vessel. Explosions lit the void, shockwaves rolling across space. The watchers on conquered worlds gasped. Priests lifted their arms in triumph, and the Ascended smiled in pride. But when the light cleared, the truth struck harder than any weapon. The ship was unharmed. Its hull, dark and scarred, shimmered with a strange light, as if invisible shields drank in the fire and spat it back into nothing. Smoke cleared, and the vessel remained, silent, unmoved, unstoppable. The alien commanders froze. Never before had their weapons failed. Never had anything survived the full fury of the divine fleets. The High Ascendant roared in rage. "Strike again! Tear it apart!" Another wave of fire filled the skies. Missiles streaked across space, beams of energy brighter than suns cut through the void. For long moments the galaxy burned with fury. But again, when the fire faded, the ship remained. Its shields pulsed with faint blue light, untouched. Then, for the first time, the intruder answered. It did not speak. It did not send messages. Instead, its hull glowed with lines of light, patterns shifting like rivers of fire. From its sides opened great doors, and weapons never before seen emerged into the void. The air itself seemed to tremble. One pulse of energy fired from the ship. Just one. The blast struck an Ascended cruiser, the pride of their fleet. In a flash, the cruiser vanished, not destroyed in fire, but silenced, its systems dead, its lights gone. The mighty ship drifted powerless, its crew screaming into silence. Seconds later, 3 more cruisers fell. Not destroyed, shut down, erased, powerless. The fleets panicked. Commanders shouted orders, priests cried prayers, soldiers begged for guidance. Never in the history of the Ascended had their ships fallen without fire, without a fight. This was not destruction. It was something worse. It was domination. Across the conquered worlds, whispers spread like fire. The priests tried to silence them, but the people spoke anyway. The gods cannot stop it. The gods are afraid. The Ascended tried to regroup. They gathered their largest dreadnoughts, massive fortresses that had never lost a battle. Their weapons alone could shatter moons. They aimed everything at the human ship. The intruder did not move. It waited. Then with another pulse, the dreadnoughts fell silent. The gods' pride, their strongest weapons, floated dead in space. One ship had undone centuries of terror in minutes. For the first time in generations, the galaxy watched the gods hesitate. The High Ascendant's voice broke the silence, but it was weaker now, filled with a crack of fear. "This is no mortal power. This is a trick, a shadow. Press on, press on." But the fleets no longer moved with certainty. Their weapons still burned, their engines still roared, but their hearts faltered. Against one vessel, their storm had become nothing. The human ship remained silent, its dark hull glowing faintly with power. It moved forward slowly like a predator among prey. Each step shook the illusion of divinity that the Ascended had built for centuries. On a distant world, a child looked up at the night sky and whispered words that spread faster than any fleet. The gods can fall. The test of power. The battlefield was silent now, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of fear. Thousands of alien ships floated in formation, their weapons ready, but their confidence was gone. Across the galaxy, people who had been told all their lives that the Ascended were gods now stared in disbelief. The gods had struck with all their fire and the intruder still lived. The human warship drifted forward, its enormous shape casting a shadow across the fleets. Its surface seemed alive with faint lights, glowing veins that pulsed as if the ship itself were breathing. There were no symbols of worship, no declarations of divinity. It carried only power, raw and undeniable. The Ascended generals gathered in their command chambers, their voices rising in anger and fear. "It is a weapon stolen from another empire," one shouted. "It is a ghost ship, a machine of trickery," another insisted. But beneath their arguments was the truth none dared to admit. They were losing control. The High Ascendant's face appeared above them, his golden mask shining, his voice sharp like thunder. "We are gods. We cannot falter before a shadow. Show the intruder the fire that split worlds. Let the galaxy see our strength." At his command, the fleets prepared their final test. They would bring the wrath of the gods upon this lone vessel. Their dreadnoughts aligned, their battle stations charged weapons powerful enough to erase continents. The priests across the worlds declared that this was the moment divinity would be proven once again. The order came. Thousands of beams lit up the void, cutting across the darkness like rivers of fire. Missiles streaked forward, leaving behind tails of light. The galaxy itself seemed to burn as the Ascended unleashed more power than any battle in memory. It was the storm that had destroyed countless enemies, the storm that had built their empire. And yet, the storm broke. The human ship glowed with a shield that shimmered like water. The weapons struck, the missiles exploded, but nothing broke through. The energy vanished into the shield as if the universe itself bent to protect the vessel. To the eyes of the Ascended, it was impossible. To the eyes of the conquered, it was hope. Then came the answer. The warship opened its weapons fully now, and the galaxy trembled. From its sides came lines of blue fire, beams that struck with surgical precision. An Ascended battlecruiser vanished in a burst of light. Another followed, its systems erased in a blink. Entire squadrons fell silent, their engines dead, their weapons useless. The Ascended screamed into their channels. "Shields failing. Engines down! We are blind. We are blind." One pulse, just one, from the human ship tore through hundreds of vessels. It did not destroy them with fire. It cut out their power, silenced their pride, left them drifting like carcasses in the void. Never had the gods been so humiliated. The people of conquered worlds fell to their knees, but not in worship. They fell in awe, in shock, in a new kind of reverence, not for their old masters, but for something else. For the ship that could stand alone against gods. The Ascended tried again and again, but each attack failed. Their mightiest dreadnought, armed with weapons that had crushed a dozen civilizations, fired its cannon directly at the intruder. The blast tore across space, brighter than the sun, and yet, when the light faded, the human ship still moved forward, silent and untouched. Then with a single strike, the dreadnought itself fell. Its lights flickered, its power died, and it drifted helplessly in the dark. An empire's pride, a symbol of divinity, reduced to a corpse. The High Ascendant's voice shook for the first time in living memory. "This cannot be. This cannot be real. We are gods. We cannot fall." But the truth spread faster than his words. On planets across the galaxy, in temples and shrines, the people whispered a new truth. The gods bled. The gods feared. The gods could be defeated. The warship pressed on, each pulse of its weapons tearing more holes in the Ascended fleets. Ships fled, their commanders abandoning the fight. Entire formations scattered like dust before the wind. The once mighty armada of the gods was breaking, not in battle, but in spirit. The conquered species, watching from afar, felt something they had not felt in centuries. Their hearts beat faster, their voices rose. It was not prayer. It was not fear. It was something older, something stronger. It was hope. For generations, the Ascended had ruled through fear, declaring themselves eternal. But now, before the eyes of all, eternity cracked. And still, the human ship had not spoken a word. The silence was more terrifying than any roar of victory. It was the silence of judgment, of a predator that did not need to shout to prove its strength. The gods were failing, and the galaxy knew it. In that moment, as wreckage drifted across the stars and the fleets of the Ascended scattered, one truth spread across every world, whispered from lips that had once only trembled in prayer: the gods are not gods, and the Warship is only beginning. The collapse of faith. The stars had always been the throne of the Ascended. For ages, their fleets filled the skies with light and fire, symbols of eternal rule. But now, across those same skies, their warships drifted powerless. Their golden hulls, once shining like suns, hung in silence. The galaxy was watching, and what it saw was not gods, it was fear. On conquered worlds, priests raised their voices louder than ever. They told the crowds that this intruder was a demon, that it was only a shadow sent to test the faithful. They promised that the gods could not fall, that the fleets would soon crush the enemy. But their words were weak, carried more by desperation than faith. The people who listened no longer trembled. They whispered instead, "What if the priests are wrong? What if this ship is stronger than the gods?" Those whispers spread like wildfire. Markets, mines, temples, prisons, everywhere slaves and citizens spoke in secret. Generations of silence broke in a single night. The illusion that had chained their minds for centuries began to shatter. Meanwhile, in the command halls of the Ascended, the truth was plain. Reports came in from every battle group. Thousands of ships disabled, hundreds destroyed, dreadnoughts left drifting. Their finest weapons had failed. The warlords who had once spoken with arrogance now argued like frightened children. Some demanded retreat, others begged to negotiate, while a few still clung to rage. The High Ascendant listened to their words and felt the walls of his throne room closing in. For centuries he had been worshipped as the voice of eternity. Now his voice trembled as he shouted, "We cannot retreat. If we falter, the galaxy will forget who we are. Attack again and again until the shadow burns." But deep inside, even he knew the truth. The galaxy was already forgetting. The human warship pressed forward through their sacred sectors, destroying fortresses that had stood for hundreds of years. It moved without mercy, without hesitation, and without pause. Yet what made it most terrifying was its silence. Not once had it spoken. Not once had it declared its name. The Ascended called themselves gods, but this ship needed no title. Its power was its identity. Across the stars, rebellion stirred. On the mining world of Karos, slaves rose against their guards for the first time in living memory. On the desert planet of Cyrith, temples once filled with worshippers stood empty as people gathered in secret to pray not to the Ascended, but to the unknown force that fought against them. And on countless worlds, children looked up at the sky and no longer feared. They hoped. The Ascended tried to hide the truth. They cut transmissions, silenced witnesses, destroyed recordings, but they could not stop the sight of their broken fleets drifting through space. Wreckage did not lie. People saw it with their own eyes, and faith collapsed faster than any fortress. In one sector, a governor of the Ascended stood before his people and commanded them to kneel. Instead, they rose and stoned him in the streets. In another, a garrison of alien soldiers once loyal to the gods turned their weapons on their masters, shouting, "You bleed like us." The empire of eternity was crumbling. Still, the High Ascendant refused to see it. He stood before his council, his golden mask reflecting the dim light of failing systems. "This is not defeat," he lied. "This is a trial. The divine always triumphs." His words echoed, but no one answered. His warlords, his priests, his generals all lowered their eyes. They had seen the truth, and no amount of thunder in his voice could erase it. The human ship continued, slow and unstoppable. It passed over sacred worlds without firing a shot, and yet its shadow was enough to ignite rebellion below. Cities burned, but not from the intruder's weapons, from the people rising against their gods. The galaxy was changing in real time, and the change could not be undone. The High Ascendant looked out from his palace on Ilaris, watching the stars burn with battles he could not win. For the first time in centuries, he felt the weight of mortality. The gods had never been gods. They had only been rulers with power, and now that power was failing. And still, the warship had not spoken. Its silence was louder than any declaration, louder than the cries of rebellion, louder than the prayers of priests. It said without words what the galaxy now understood. The age of gods was ending, and the age of something new was beginning. Humanity's message. The stars above Alaris burned with wreckage. Fragments of golden hulls drifted through the void, silent and cold. What had once been a divine fleet was now a graveyard of broken ships. Across the galaxy, millions watched the downfall. The gods had been tested and the gods had failed. The human warship floated at the center of it all, silent as ever. Its dark frame moved slowly across the ruins, its shields glowing faintly with a light that seemed endless. It had destroyed without boasting. It had fought without anger. It had advanced without hesitation. To the galaxy, this silence was more terrifying than any roar of triumph. On the worlds below, chaos erupted. Temples burned, statues fell, and the priests who once spoke with thunder were chased through the streets. For generations, the people had knelt in fear. Now they rose, not in worship but in rebellion. On Cairo, slaves broke their chains and stormed the barracks. On Cyrith, citizens dragged golden idols through the dirt. On dozens of planets, banners of rebellion flew for the first time in centuries. The myth of divinity had died, and with its death came fire. In the palace of Alaris, the High Ascendant stood alone. His mask of gold lay cracked on the floor. His council had abandoned him. His fleets were gone. For the first time in his long life, he felt mortal. He looked at the great windows of his throne room, and beyond them at the dark ship that had ended everything. He whispered words he had once forced others to kneel to. Mercy. The ship gave no answer. It continued its path, its silence pressing harder than any judgment. The High Ascendant screamed into the void, "Who are you? What are you?" His words carried across the stars, but the only reply was the hum of the ship's engines. Then at last the silence broke. A transmission spread across every channel, every frequency, every world. It was not thunder. It was not divine. It was a human voice, calm, steady, and cold. "We do not bow to false gods." The words echoed through the halls of temples and palaces. They filled the air of every planet that had suffered under the Ascended. People stopped in their tracks. Soldiers dropped their weapons. Priests fell silent. The voice continued, "We stand for freedom. We fight for those who cannot fight. We do not seek worship. We seek only truth. And the truth is this: humanity is here." The transmission ended. The silence returned. But the galaxy was no longer the same. In the streets of conquered cities, cheers broke out. Chains were shattered, banners were torn down, and for the first time in centuries, laughter rose above fear. The people did not know who humanity was or where they came from. But they knew one thing with certainty: the gods could bleed and the gods could fall. On distant worlds, whispers turned to shouts. Humanity is here. It was repeated in every tongue, carved into walls, painted across banners, sung by children. It spread like fire through the stars, unstoppable, unforgettable. The High Ascendant fell to his knees in his empty throne room. He looked at the darkness outside and understood that his time was over. The age of lies was finished. The mask of godhood had been broken forever. The human warship did not fire again. It did not stay to conquer. It did not demand loyalty. It simply turned and left, vanishing into the void. Yet its presence remained heavier than any army. One ship had undone an empire of centuries. One message had rewritten the fate of the galaxy. For the conquered, it was the birth of hope. For the Ascended, it was the death of eternity. And for humanity, it was only the beginning. Because if one ship could end the reign of false gods, what would happen when the galaxy learned how many more waited beyond the stars? The message had been sent. The seed had been planted. And the universe would never forget the day the gods fell before a single human warship.